Hey guys, it is March the 21st, Monday of another crazy week in the markets. Always exciting. But today we have someone that I'm really excited to have on the show. We have Professor Daniel O'Brien, who has an amazing background in agriculture. And you know how much we have been very excited about all things agriculture over here. For better or for worse, it has been an amazing thing to be talking about fertilizer, to be talking about Brazil, to be talking about some of the companies that really benefit. But I think it's really important for us to understand a little bit of a economic picture. I'm going to have him give a little bit of background himself because I will probably butcher the amazing accomplishments of this amazing human being that, anyways, I will hand it over there. Dan, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm an extension agricultural economist. I was raised up in the United States in the Midlands, in the state of Nebraska, and I've tended to work around these states in Iowa and Kansas. Have a again, strong farm background, dealing with the type of crops and livestock that we're talking about today. So I always think that helps a bit to have an idea of the production processes involved and the risks involved. So, yeah, I'm get to work with Kansas State University and try to be of help to people in Kansas and beyond in understanding some of these market issues.
Yeah, you do a lot of consulting work. I think you're flying out today. So we're very fortunate to try to squeeze you in before your flight out. Okay, so I got a bunch of questions from different people. Some of them might be mine, I will say. I was really, one of the things that I think is always really hard for people to get their head around because there's so many agricultural products out there. What was it like going into this year? Because I think a lot of times it's really hard to understand and appreciate where we were at as relates to all these grain crops in January.
Well, kind of look at different commodities for corn by itself, apart from feed grains overall. From in 2017, we had a world stocks to use of about 31%. We had whittled down year by year down to about 25. If you take a world minus China view to isolate that, we were down to about 10% stocks to use, 10.1%. And then, of course, when you bring this disruption from Ukraine into the equation and try to deal with the loss of 20 to 24 million metric tons, depending on how you count it, of their exports, much less their production, then those world stocks to use numbers they're attention grabbing in terms of the potential for tightening of world stocks and just to support of prices that we're already seeing being expressed in the futures markets. And that's just for corn. The big issue would be for wheat, and I think that's where the not just from an ag market point of view, but from a humanitarian political stability point of view, there's a lot of concern about that. And world stocks, as soon, I guess, back in say 2017, 18, had grown to about 38, 39%, had declined down to 35% in the 21-22 marketing year that will be ending here at the end of March, end of May, pardon me. But then the world less China view, which again, accounting kind of isolating out aside from China's stocks that they have, which are substantial as a percentage of the world, we had a projection of about 22% of ending stocks to use, and that's the lowest that we've had in years and years, going back at least to 2013 and 14. So sizable issues to deal with, and a lot of concern, particularly with regard to how important that Black Sea region has been in for world wheat markets. You just really see a lot of potential for tightening even further if we're unable to get, I say we, because it's kind of a world collective issue. If we're unable to get the Ukrainian wheat crop out this year, then then the 21% stocks to use that we have could move even lower. And I've got some projections that I'd put together recently of moving to below 20%. And then that's assuming that's assuming the worst case scenario, that we're not able to get anything out of there. So hopefully that doesn't occur. But Anyway, we have a situation where we have very tight stocks. The world's very concerned. It's expressing its concern in terms of higher commodity prices, and so we watch to see if the logistical issues that we hear reported that are plaguing Ukrainian agriculture, much less their broader economy, if they are going to inhibit the ability of Ukraine and the world to get that Ukrainian wheat crop out.
Now, you said a couple things in there. I just want to make sure sometimes it's for us non-farmers, as far as that goes, we don't know certain things. But I feel like folks have told me before that there's something specific to wheat, and especially when those supplies are tight, that is a particular issue that is not like that matters a little bit even more than the other grains. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it goes so directly into human food consumption. We take wheat and we turn it into flour, and then it goes in pretty short order through millers into direct into bread and other human food consumption products. So we can feed wheat if it's low quality wheat in the world, but again, we're just very much concerned about food supplies all that much more directly when we're talking about wheat. Now we can, when we grow corn, which is the other major crop, there's also sunflower oil that's affected. But when the other major crop would be corn, and we take corn, we feed it to livestock, we run it through ethanol plants or bioenergy producing industries, et cetera. But and we tend to have some. We can substitute grain sorghums, millets, things like that, perhaps for corn in the feed grain world, barley, et cetera. But for wheat, there just aren't very many substitutes. So if we're short of wheat, we have a variety of types of wheat in a number of countries, thankfully, that grow wheat. But when world wheat supplies get tight, then you're looking at a pretty direct impact on human food consumption and the livelihood and the diets of people, and not just the industrialized and developed countries, but also off into in developing countries. And that's a lot of concern for the UN and anybody that has a humanitarian perspective on these things.
Now, Professor O'Brien, I've given you host stuff, so if there are slides that you want to show, I wanted to just let you know that you can also show them if you wish. Okay. So just in case there are any slides, because I know you'd mentioned there were some things that you might have.
So I'll go ahead and pull those up if that's okay with you.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, we'd love to see them.
Okay. So what do you see? Do you see, and I think I need to duplicate slideshow. There you go. So here are the questions that I was sent prior to the meeting. Is that what you're seeing there?
Yep, those are some of the questions. But, so whichever ones we can get through, because I know we got a hard stop for you. Which.
Yeah. So we'll go forth here. So first of all, for tight global grains, prior to the, how tight were things? Well, that's, as we talked about for corn, you can see if the world stocks to use, world minus China stocks to use, tightening up quite a bit. Grain sorghum, or actually more so for world coarse grains, also tightening up a bit, again below 10%, and that the NA stands for basically the USDA not giving those numbers out yet. They will in their May report coming up. For wheat, you really see that the challenge and concern of the world supply demand watchers. Okay. The world minus China stocks used at 21%, and we've been at 23, 24, 25. So it really does support what you were talking about, May, in terms of the sensitivity to what happens on wheat. Soybeans, we were also tight on soybeans. There's not as likely as much impact directly on the world soybean market because there's some soybean processing and some soybeans grown in that part of the world, but not really a major issue. But when you do see that, even on world soybean markets, there's a tightening of stocks down to 22.6% with the last numbers that we had. And again, we were at in 2018-19, 38 some percent. So So anyway, quite the situation. From that FAO report that came out, they've got some good data on the impact on the wheat market from the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and particularly on wheat. We're I guess my own perspective, I directly am wondering about the production in Ukraine. I'm wondering about the financing and the access from Russia. In terms of these numbers, and you can see also for corn on the right-hand side of the stage the screen. You can see the impact of Ukraine upon world exporters. They're basically the number 3 or number 4, depending on how you rate it. The number 3 exporter for maize. So in this graphic anyway. So interesting. And so that would be the first question. Do any other speakers have a comment on that?
They usually wait till the end. It's okay.
Oh, they do? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's just move through these quickly then.
They'll pepper
okay,
you with questions from nowhere. Yeah.
Okay. So what specific disruptions have occurred in the Ukrainian ag economy? In the FAO report that just came out, had a nice description in Ukraine. There are concerns that conflict may result in damages to the inland port transportation infrastructure and the seaports, as well as storage and processing. A lot of fancy language for basically, yeah, they've got a lot of things that aren't functioning very well right now, particularly if they don't have fuel or they're not able to repair things. If there's a danger from being on the transportation system. They've looked at rail transport.
I was just going to mention, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about the storage and processing infrastructure, because that's actually something that's a really big deal when you got grain in particular, I would imagine.
Well, and May, when that structure needs energy to function, and if there are domestic energy supplies, electricity, fuel to move, etc., if that's disrupted, then if they don't have fuel, they're not able to plant crops, they're not able to harvest crops, they're not able to transport crops. So all manner of issues to consider. And there's a good point made in that FAO report about yes, even if the ports were working and we could move grain into that area, the increased risk of insuring vessels going into that Black Sea region would work against the cost effectiveness of shipping there. So, and in the early parts of this conflict, there were reports of some ships from International Grain Company origins that were hit by rockets, etc. So the insurers would have to probably respond to that. And in our webinar not long ago, we talked about this example from happens to be from a soybean crusher, talking about a few key things with regard to how domestic markets. What caught my eye was that prices of soybeans are virtually absent. So there's a disruption of their marketing structures that's occurred there. I've talked a lot about many drivers have joined the Army. So again, a lot of that population has been translocating, some of it moving out of the country. So just a lot of disruption. So anyway, lots of logistical problems that happen when you completely disrupt a domestic economy. Statements in there that they're not so much exporting from that last slide out of the country, but now just for their own domestic food uses, they're selling internally. So really quite the situation. How may U.S. farmers respond to the situation? Well, we kind of looked at standing back and looking at the world corn supply demand impact of what has occurred in Ukraine and what may happen in the next year. Again, Ukraine's corn production at 42 million metric tons as a fair percentage, a significant percentage of world production. But that export number really catches your eye in terms of corn. Ukraine would be expected in normal situations to export about 27 to 33 million metric tons. But but the whole world only exports about 200 million. So again, over 10%, heading towards 15 and more. Just a challenging deal. So, so what's likely to happen? Just based on price signals alone, U.S. and global corn plantings probably would be expected to increase as farmers look at the profitability opportunity. And you can say the same thing likely for soybeans. We have tremendous soybean prices. For wheat, we can plant wheat as well, but if it's spring wheat, we can plant that in the months coming up in a lot of these places and get a response quick. But for winter wheat, which is what a lot of what they grow in Ukraine, that was planted a while back. Quote, it's developing now, and it'll be a bit before we can quickly respond on that front. Exports.
You know what,
we mentioned Brazil.
We do have some people that are really excited. I was amazed at how quick the questions are coming in. Jan, do you want to come off mute and ask your question real quick?
Sure. I suppose we'll just go to the latest one, which is how are the sanctions on Russia are going to affect the fertilizer markets. Russia is obviously the biggest exporter for fertilizer when it comes to India, which has massive population, massive growth levels. So how are these sort of prolonged sanctions, what the consequences might be to the food markets globally?
Yes, let me go to that. In fact, I do have that back here. I want to address that. Okay, so how will the Russian, you're asking the question, how will Russia-Ukraine conflict affect fertilizer markets? Well, yes, it does. And you can just see by the top 10 exporters of nitrogen, Russia's as a single entity, the top one, but the top country, number one rated, about tied for number two in terms of phosphorus. For potassium, clearly number two. So just by quantity alone, that if Russia's unable to ship, or countries don't want to buy from them, or the financing issues get in the way, which we're hearing reports of, then yeah, just on a supply side, it would tighten up those markets.
On the financing side, you mean paying the Russian fertilizer producer, or how are you thinking on that?
We've heard reports of how as banks get involved in foreign trade, financing, currencies being traded back and forth, et cetera, that sanctions that can be placed on the financial community can be a real inhibitor to countries doing business with Russia. And actually, people in our financial markets, as they're on the line, can comment probably a lot better on that than I can. But you can see the Russian Federation is the number one exporter of nitrogen fertilizers in the world, quoted by the FAO, and the report just came out. Number two supplier of both potassium, and I'd call it potassium, they call it potassic phosphorus fertilizers. Now, interesting, here in the United States, this is one thing that we're I would not say we're insulated from, because we get the indirect impact of higher prices on world markets coming in and affecting us in the U.S. But our main supplier of potash, anyway, would be Canada. So it's not that we're completely insulated, because again, the market price affects us. But so this would probably be the case for any country, as they identify who they buy their fertilizer from, and if they've been going to Russia in particular, then yeah, they're probably quite worried and looking at alternative sources. They're probably looking at Canada, some of these other places, Morocco, as an alternative. Brazil, as we've talked about Brazil a bit, we've heard headlines in the news that Brazil has been proactive in still reaching out to Russia, seeking, as I understand it, reading the headlines anyway in the articles, still wanting to do business with them because they're their primary supplier. So anyway, I did want to address that question as it came up.
Now, I would love to hear you talk a bit more about Brazil. It's got, I feel like its role has just been growing on the global landscape ever since probably it's always, but really picked up even more aggressively in the last half decade. Can you, I haven't been, for the life of me, but I think they're out of growing season at this point, or how do we think about Brazil, China, all that stuff?
Yeah, and May, I want to address that in the structure of this question you sent before. So how do you see agricultural trade between China and Brazil responding? And that brings into focus just how important Brazil is. So between China and Brazil in particular, likely to remain strong, especially with the exchange rate advantage of Brazil over the United States. It's not that the U.S. dollar is doing just wonderfully, is my own opinion, because we have inflation issues, et cetera. But as it's dangerous to use the word quote safe haven, but at least with the Federal Reserve backing the U.S. dollar, as my perception is that the world would view the U.S. dollar as at least having some more backing than other places. All that said. Generally, the exchange rate in Brazil has been weaker, so that's a advantage in terms of trade. So that would be an advantage for China to continue trade with Brazil, but also if you're talking about soybeans in particular, and now corn, as Brazil is a strong exporter of corn, there just aren't that many places in the world to go buy these. Large exportable quantities of soybeans in particular, and you can count them in our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, on your hand, and on three fingers. That would be Argentina, probably more so in terms of a processed product form, but Argentina, Brazil, and the United States. And so much depends on just but we kind of have the idea now in the U.S. that we basically have a 6-month export year under normal circumstances. There are the 6 months when Brazil supplies have pretty much moved, and for the most part, and the only major supplier in the world be the United States. That's following our harvest, and then you have the other 6 months when the Brazilian harvest has come in, and that a lot of that's running from say February through February, March, April, May, June, July, et cetera. And at that time, because of some of these issues, generally countries buy from Brazil, and China has been a strong buyer from Brazil. I do think that crop availability will be a big issue in this coming year. Brazil had in southern Brazil, they had drought problems that tangibly, significantly cut back on the amount of soybeans they were able to produce this year. So because of that, we're seeing better soybean export business right now in the United States than we normally do at this time. Normally, gosh, you've got the South American crop coming, and just not that much business. We can get awfully slow in terms of weekly movement, but we're still holding up decently at this time, even though you have that South American crop coming on. Pardon me, I guess, and we had looked at that.
I have a quick question just so that I can make sure I'm getting good context from how you're saying this. In the earlier slide, you were talking about how, it's like a 2% reduction that we're already seeing at this point with all this disruption. Is there a more tangible way to put what a 2% disruption does to the world as far as that goes? Like when we're at 20%, it's like as low as 2014. But how do we think about what that does to, I mean, I don't know if there's a way to put it in terms of grocery store prices or if in terms of like which countries are going to really struggle. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to bring up something in response to that. Will China and U.S. see food shortages? As you mentioned, different countries, et cetera. Let's see here. Okay. So, and in the context of wheat, in particular, as we had pointed out, how important wheat is in the to consumers around the world, and yes, U.S., Ukraine, Russia impacts wheat seedings to go up, exports from countries that have wheat available will also be strong. Prices, systematic price inflation. I really found it interesting that. We express tightness in terms of we vote by our prices in terms of where we think prices are going to go. So the FAO came out here recently, and again in that report last week, and they made this statement that wasn't buried in their analysis, but if you look for it, it's stark. resulting global supply gap in reduction in grain and sunflower seed exports could push up international food and feed prices by 8 to 22% above all their already elevated levels. And then they came up with, I appreciate their willingness to publish these, but there's a story in here. So for nominal price increase response for wheat, they show a strong run up in early years and then tailing off, particularly for wheat, giving the world a chance to recover, basically, and probably also for the production area in the blacks in Ukraine to recover, and hopefully a return to normal relations between Russia in the financial markets. And so you see that run up in wheat, and we're in 22 now. They're still forecasting increases in 23, and then, quote, tailing off. For corn, more of a run up in this year, and then at least in the you look at, they have moderate and severe scenarios, a little bit more of a sideways movement than later on for corn, the big run up for wheat. They also show in general coarse grains that would include corn, grain sorghum, other grain type crops. Then they show they're projecting a sharp run up this year in 2022 for oil seeds, and that would be soybeans, cottonseed oil, palm oil, sunflowers, but then more of a quicker response and sideways prices from there. Being an economist, this is how we normally do things. We're a lot better at projecting the upfront than we are later. So we tend to show our run-ups in prices and then go sideways. So that's sort of what's going on.
There's still a possibility that, yeah. I know we're getting really close to your time. So if there's other questions, let's go ahead and take those first versus me dominating it. Anyone else want to ask Professor O'Brien a question before we move forward?
Yes, if I may. This is Dave. David. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Texas, so cut from the same cloth. I remember having cattle on feed and them eating a lot of corn. Do you see that affecting the beef market? Extremely high. Dave, same situation that we've seen cattle feeders when they get really high costs, they don't feed them as long. Quote, and they'll it'll tend to shorten up. It would make sense to me that it would tend to shorten up the feeding time period. We'd be more efficient on that. We'd aim for what feed efficiencies we could get, and then as soon as they got reasonable market weights, quote, we would move them out of the feedlots. And I grew up on more of a pork farm, and again, that and in the longer run, I think we've both seen where actually moving cattle, moving livestock at acceptable market weights and not overfeeding them actually is a real benefit for these markets. It keeps us from being overwhelmed with meat and crashing the market. So I think it'll lead to shorter feeding times. Really, the issue that I don't have a good graphic on that we could, if we had time, we could go look it up and find it, is what's happening in the cattle market. It's been up and down. I don't know the current state of that, but we had pretty good prices for a bit. But then and I hope I'm saying this correctly, we had run up pretty high in a number of these of markets. So we saw it in the grains in March the 8th. And then in a way, and I don't want to be offensive or anything, but it's almost as if the market said no more. And so we had on the run-ups, we had these markets on literally on the 7th of March caused the grain markets, millers, other people in grain markets to say, we're going to, that in the cash markets, they're going to step back from that. So they widened their bases all in one day. They followed probably a few market leaders as they did it. And then it was kind of a cascade. So I know that happened in the grain markets. I want to check and see if that's happened in the livestock markets too. If rather, instead of just running full bore into high price inflation, if on the cash side, they've stepped back. And for those of you that in your industries, as you're looking at this, to me, that's I understand why you do that in the short run, but in the long run, that's unsustainable because eventually you have to bring in the product, and we may not want to go to higher prices, and then we may widen out our local adjustments, our basis. We may weaken that, but eventually you have to run your plant. You have to go supply the product. So I know what happened in the short run, but I'd question whether that's sustainable in the long run because eventually we'll have to go feed people, and we'll have to come back to those markets. At least that's my view on it, Dave.
Oh my goodness. Professor O'Brien, I know you said you had a 1:30 hard stop. I mean, we will legitimately ask you questions for as long as you want, as far as that goes. Can we take one more question, or do you have to definitely go?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah.
All right. Is there someone else that would like to ask a question? Let me just ask the audience really quick. All right. Well, the other topic that I know that I care about is that sunflower market, because I don't think people are talking about it, and I heard you talk about it the other day. So I would love for you to share that a bit more.
We in Kansas grow a few sunflowers, but our oilseed markets across the board are affected by them. So you can see one thing that really stands out is how much impact on exports of sunflower seed is affected by Russia and especially Ukraine. The total together is 50% plus of world sunflowers being affected by that. And let's see here. Yeah, pardon me. That's the oil from sunflowers. So you can ask the question, well, yeah, I understand that. Does that affect us? This would be my take on it. So again, we acknowledge the strong position of Russia and Ukraine, both in the sunflower seed or sunflower oil market. But what's happened, and I'm sure I'm not the only one on here that would have this concern. We have combined tight palm oil supplies, strong soybean oil demand, and so adding on top of that this carve out of available supplies from Ukraine, it has at least an indirect impact on global oilseed markets. At least you can see even in the last USDA report on the front end of all this activity in the Ukraine, the USDA took a preemptive action, raised their projection of U.S. soybean oil exports, cut back on their projection of biofuel, and that's quite a situation. There's a lot of momentum in biofuel, for renewable diesel in the United States, but they cut back the export. Increased the export number for soybean oil, and again, I'm not a close watcher of palm oil markets, but a lot of consternation. Literally articles talking about where have these palm oil supplies gone, and how come they're not accessible? So as we have stronger soybean oil production that comes from exports, then we start to impact soybean crush, not just in the United States, but also in Argentina in particular. So even though Ukraine does not grow a lot of soybeans, still the impact, through their sunflower factor, the dramatic cutback and the availability of that product will affect the oilseed complex and help to support soybean prices. So not a direct effect, but a strong indirect one.
Now, can I ask you one more question, and then I'll let you leave? How long does it take for the planting season to how long does it take when you have this kind of shortage for it to correct itself? Like how many seasons, is it just, hopefully we can have one good winter season from the south, from the southern regions to make up for this, or no, that's not how it works?
Well, I think the analog year for us, if that's the right terminology, to an analog time period would be say the 2012, 2013 timeframe, to where here in the United States anyway, we had a major drought, and actually we were short in 2011 of corn production. So you had commodity prices led by corn run sharply higher. they were already high in 2011. We thought, well, we get another crop, we'll get out of this, et cetera. Well, then we had a drought in 2012. Of course, ethanol was growing, and all its strong demand also. So it took us from that drought in 2012, and we maintained high commodity prices until we were confident of the next crop coming. And that, in the United States anyway, that next crop coming, again, we had to go through the spring planting of 2013, go through early crop development in May, June, started into early July, and then lo and behold, strong crop coming. And then we started to see the market not worry so much about another short crop, and prices dropped dramatically. And frankly, from that drop in 2013, we haven't seen feed grain prices respond in any tangible manner anywhere near where we're at now until what happened just recently. So how long does it take? It generally takes another, I guess, a replenishing of supply, another set of crops in the world to come to make it happen. And you got to plant them. You have to have success in all of that. And by the way, we're planting crops this year with very high fertilizer prices. Someone had mentioned fertilizer earlier. So there's certainly the question of, at these sky high fertilizer prices, to use hyperbole, how much did we apply? If in a normal situation we apply an extra 10, 15% just for safety, well, at $1,400 a ton, there's not a lot of room for extra money just to be thrown out there. So we probably have applied less fertilizer to a lot of crops here and around the world. So even with the same rainfall, same great conditions, we'll probably get less crop just because we haven't applied as much fertilizer. So if anything, that the fertilizer situation, I guess I would contend that's likely to prolong and limit a little bit somewhat our ability to grow large crops and replenish our supplies. So that'll be a factor as we head off into this summer and maybe off into the summer of 2023 as well.
Huh. Wow. It's going to take. All right. Well, if you guys see a good sale, I think that we could end. You need to go ahead and get yourself some food stocks. Professor O'Brien, you've been amazing. I know you probably have to run out. If you could pass me back the mic on the host, that would be amazing, so that I could close out the show with just a couple comments.
Okay. And so let's see here. So actually, should I just run? If I end, will you automatically get that back?
That might work. Yeah, let's try that out and see.
Why don't I just no? Okay, let's see here.
It's like a little 3 dots on the top, and then it should, or if you go to more, it might give it to you to make host.
Okay.
I know, I do the same thing with this technology.
Okay, so okay, remove spotlight, hide self view. Why?
Don't worry about it.
So,
I know you need to get going. I want you to fiddle with this. You've been so gracious.
I'll just go ahead and I'll end my participation in it. You just go ahead and take it then. Would that be okay?
Okay, that sounds great. And you guys can also find, I'm going to post, absolutely, this has been a pleasure. I'm definitely going to post agricultural info, market info. Is that the name of so I'm definitely going to post that in the Discord, and it'll be in the show notes as well for this. And also, Professor O'Brien has a blog that really has great slides on it as well. So we'll make sure that everyone has access to that and can find you that way too. But we'll see you. Have a safe flight, Professor O'Brien, for sure.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks.
Take care. Okay, well, hopefully that was really helpful to everyone. Let's see in the chat. Oh, yeah. Thanks for joining. Okay. I am the host. Okay, so I just want to share a couple more things. Today, as we mentioned, it's Monday, and we knew that Monday was going to be a funky day in the markets no matter what. Let's see if it's actually showing down here. All right, my computer is not participating the way that I would like to. I think there were a lot of takeaways from that, but it does look like, as far as some of the positions that we've had as relates to both Brazil, which we continue to be very bullish on for the exposure to both materials, energy, and a lot of this consumer staples really is, unlike for the Americas, where a lot of the consumer staples are consumer products types companies, in Brazil, these are really companies that sell flat out sell grain, sell wheat, that sort of thing. It looks like any country that's got a lot of farming going on is probably going to have some benefits. We show this slide once again because it's been something we've talked about. Brazil and the United States really are special nations because although other countries do have a good deal of farming land, this is from 2014, so it's a little dated, they may not have the ideal ability to either expand their land because there's people living in it, or alternatively, they may not have the right water availability or the right climate. So we continue to be bullish on that. But this week with Monday, we do have him speaking at the conference. Usually that's a non-issue, but I think Thursday is going to be the day to kind of look for any kind of funkiness or change in the market, because we will get at that point durable goods orders and PMI, and that's going to give you a sense for what people are buying. I think this isn't expected or anticipated to be particularly strange. Potentially we'll get some, if anything, we might even get positives on the current account deficit, just because I'm sure that we come up as one of the nations that you might be trying to resecure some goods on. But it is, everybody's really doing their estimates on the economic front real time. And to that extent, you could still end up with some very, very strange news. I'm going to pause in general on the screen shares and see if there's just any general questions as we kind of close this out today. Any questions, guys? Okay, that was a lot to absorb, and I thank you guys so much. So we will see you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.